Congratulations on being selected by the Council of the American Geographical Society as its first recipient of the John Gould Medal. It is especially fitting because you, like John Gould himself, are an attorney who thinks, writes, and acts geographically and dedicates himself to geographic causes, always emphasizing law and ethics. For our audience, I will add that Bill Herbert is a distinguished lecturer and executive director of the National Center for the Study of Collective Bargaining in Higher Education and the Professions at Hunter College, City University of New York. He was for many years senior counsel for one of New York's largest labor unions, the Civil Service Employees Association, Local 100 AFL-CIO. That's where he first became concerned with human tracking. Bill was one of the earliest scholars warning the public about geoslavery. His 2006 article, No Direction Home, Will the Law Keep Pace with Human Tracking Technology, Protect Individual Privacy, and Stop Geoslavery, is a landmark. For more than 2 decades, Bill has steadfastly applied law to geographic technologies, applications, and practices affecting human welfare. His most recent paper is Geoprivacy, Convenience, and the Pursuit of Anonymity in Digital Cities. It's a chapter in a groundbreaking new book about urban informatics. It makes trade-offs clear and offers theories for the first time regarding public attitudes propelling and/or preventing loss of privacy. Now, Bill, it's your turn to speak. Geography 2050's theme this year is exploring the geographical dimensions of inequality. How has your work intersected with this theme?
Well, first, Jerry, it's a distinct honor to be the first recipient of the John E. Gould Medal from the American Geographical Society. And I'm very, very honored to be the recipient of that medal. So one of my primary areas of research and writing has concerned geospatial data as it relates to labor rights, including the growing power inequalities in workplaces, both public and private, resulting from the use of geospatial technologies, including GPS, RFID implants, biometrics, as well as now today, AI. There are clear inequalities when employers use and abuse geospatial data to monitor and control movement of workers at fixed locations, while in transit, while at the workplace, or while we're working remotely at home during the pandemic. The use of these technologies results in occupational stress, dehumanization, anxieties, alienation, and turning workers into essentially robots. So, for example, Amazon has adopted a lot of tracking technologies, both in the workplace to monitor the movement of workers inside of facilities, as well as to track their drivers, including taking photographs of drivers as they are driving, monitoring their driving behaviors. But more importantly now, we're seeing a return to what I had covered previously in my research, which is the use of technologies to track people who are working remotely, whether on the computer while at work. And this has become a much bigger issue with respect to the pandemic. In fact, The Guardian this past week had an article about the spurt of new technologies that have been developed so that employers can track people who are working at home and even taking photographs of them while working, and also monitoring their movement inside their own home. A very serious dynamic, which does fit into what you were most importantly had labeled geoslavery in your article with Peter Fisher, to show that these kind of technologies can be used to create control, and in the workplace, employers have a tremendous amount of control over their employees, and so geography and geospatial data and surveillance can enhance the power imbalance in the workplace. Now, one thing that has come up, you mentioned my article in 2006, where I raised the question in the title of whether the law will keep up with the development of new technologies, and unfortunately, it hasn't. And part of this has to do with the dynamic of concerns over property rights over human rights. And internationally, human rights are known to include worker rights. And so what you have is a situation over the past 4 decades in which there's been a general disinclination by policymakers to put checks on employers and other powers in terms of the use of technologies. And so that's part of the problem in terms of what's transpiring today, where you have now technologies that move very fast in the development, and some technologies can be used in a very ethical way. On the other hand, geographic types of technologies can also be used and abused.
What are the changes, large or small, in your field that you believe can help society move toward a more equitable future?
Well, the first is that in order to put a check on the power imbalance in the workplace and to help effectuate what used to be known as workplace democracy would be modifications to American labor law, where American labor law grants workers the right to unionize. And one of the benefits of the right to unionize is to be able to have a voice when it comes to questions about the use of technologies in the workplace, particularly with regard to surveillance. These surveillance tools can be used to try to stop unionization. It is unlawful to do such surveillance, but nevertheless, the labor laws are very weak right now. And the more that labor law is amended to increase the rights of workers, will stem the power imbalance, which allow for employers to adopt these technologies. But secondly, there is a real strong need for there to be development of new laws to put a check on the use of geospatial data to stem the imbalance that exists. And one model for that would be what has transpired in the European Union over the past 2 decades. In 1995, there was the adoption of a privacy directive, which led to a series of opinions regarding how what's the scope of that, what are the limits to the use of data collection and data use, including geospatial data, and this privacy directive mandated certain core essential elements. One being requiring consent, one being transparency, so people know what data is being collected. Others is requiring proportionality. So limiting the scope of data collection, which is tied with a geoethical approach, requiring legitimacy, making sure that the data collection is being used for legitimate purposes, and a series of other essential elements. And this privacy directive was, as I said, was promulgated in 1995. And since then, though, the European Union has adopted a new regulation, the GDPR, which that regulation allows for a new limitation or a new right for people in terms of privacy rights, and that includes the right to anonymity. And the right to anonymity allows for an individual who's being subject to data collection, geospatial data collection, or other forms of data collection, to actually contact the entity that is collecting it and request that or demand that information be erased. It's a significant step forward. It's sometimes referred to as the right to be forgotten under the General Data Protection Regulation of the EU. One state, California, has adopted a similar provision recently, but unfortunately, the United States has not moved on the level of federal regulation to deal with questions about power imbalance when it comes to data collection, including geospatial data collection. The last law that was passed, which really dealt with electronic privacy, was passed in federal law that was passed was in 1986. It is yet to be amended to include stronger protections for individuals with respect to geospatial data collection or other forms of data collection. Some states have enacted statutes that are limited in scope. So, for example, some states have banned mandatory RFID implants, which is a step forward, but there really has not been the level of regulation on the state level on the question of both data collection and data use. And so in the EU, there are strong protections against the sale of data. And that's something that has become a major source of profit in the United States, of data collection and then the sale of data. And so the lack of that kind of federal or state regulation has left us in a place where there has been very little regulatory checks on the ability on the use of the collection and use of geospatial data as well as other forms of data. Part of that has to do with the amount of resources that technology companies have and using for lobbying to stop any form of efforts to pass legislation or regulations. And I understand this is all, in the United States, is all in the context of really 4 decades of a deregulatory ideology, which views that regulation is inherently bad. And so you have a situation where we've allowed tech companies, employers, and others to basically, the only limitation is what sometimes is the euphemism of self-regulation is applied. And self-regulation obviously is important, but it's not really sufficient when we see the scope of what's been transpiring when it comes to location tracking.
What roles do geosurveillance, geofencing, and geoslavery play in society's ongoing struggle to promote equality?
Well, when I think of geoslavery today, I also think back to a time in which there was a federal and state support for human tracking. And that was prior to the Civil War, when we were dealing with emancipated slaves who were trying to escape slavery. And there was tracking that transpired at that point. And when we think of the scope of what's transpiring today, we must remember what we must think about and what would have happened if the technologies that allow for geoslavery were in effect prior to the Civil War, in which there would have been a much greater degree, stronger ability of slave owners to locate their emancipated slaves. That could be done through RFID chips, could be done through tracking through cell phones, et cetera, if those technologies were available. And in terms of today, we have to be concerned about what is transpiring with the use of these technologies. One of the things that in the paper you referenced, our recent book chapter, one of the issues is the balance between convenience and the question about misuse and problems that ultimately develop with overuse of these technologies. So, for example, a recent example was I was speaking to someone who was on their way on a trip to the Adirondacks in northern New York, a mountainous area, beautiful area of New York State. And I asked them what direction they were going, because there are many ways of getting to where they were going in the Adirondacks. Some have more beautiful scenic wise, some have historic elements of it. And there are choices to be made. And the person said, well, they had no idea how they were going, even though they were about to leave, because they were going to rely on their phone and geo mapping to get them there. So they were basically shutting down their critical thinking and allowing the technology to take over, which I think is one element and to something that we should all be concerned about. And that is over-reliance on technology. Rather than allowing for geographic technologies to enhance our ability to do things, but rather than allowing it to take us over, and cutting down on our intellectual curiosity, on our independent of thought. And I think that is something that is sort of symbolic of today, where we have a large degree of anti-intellectualism taking place. And I think that we have to be very careful in the ethical approaches to the use of these technologies.
As you reflect on your career, what do you see as the most pressing challenges that geographers need to address in order to advance the cause of equality?
Well, that's a great question. And I think one of the most important elements for geographers is to take the specialized skills and knowledge of the discipline and engage with others in other disciplines for development of greater degree of ethical approaches to the use of the technologies and to the question of geoethics. So, for example, geographers can help assist employers and labor representatives of developing a more ethical approach to the use of the technologies, and to understand the scope of what the technologies mean and what the technologies can lead to, and a greater awareness. I think there's a lot of ability to do that, and one of the things that is important is to be able to develop a multidisciplinary approach to geoethics, and I think that's really important. One of the things that in my career that's been very satisfying as a labor lawyer who represents who represented workers as well as unions across New York State was my ability to interact with geographers as a part of conferences. And I've met some extraordinary people, including Jerry, yourself, but also people like Nancy Obermeyer and Katina Michael from Arizona State University, who's not a geographer, but people who are scholars in other fields, and being able to have that interaction, which is it just helped develop my thinking when it comes to the ethical issues involving geography. Most recently, I've been involved with an organizing committee with AAG, which put together a series of webinars on geoethics, and through that I've worked with a number of people from different areas, including Michael Goodchild, but also others who from different fields, such as sociologists, Rich Applebaum, and others, to develop these webinars to increase the dialogue between disciplines, to then develop protocols and trainings for others to be able to ensure that geography and geoethical issues are front and center as we move forward in this world of new technologies that are growing, continuing to grow.
Scholars sometimes commit wholeheartedly to protecting society from particular threats, then go a lifetime without ever personally witnessing that threat in the real world. Yet you served for many years as a practicing attorney charged with defending labor union members from problems you foresaw in geoslavery, geoprivacy, geosurveillance. Later, you continued to study those topics after you moved to academia. How do you reconcile personal and professional interest and concerns in regard to those threats today?
Well, that's a great question. And in some way, I feel very fortunate that, first of all, that in the context of being a labor attorney, I got to handle cases relating to geoslavery and the imposition of geo-tracking in the workplace. When I was at the union that you mentioned, I had a general counsel who provided and permitted me to, in addition to having a large caseload that involving issues that involve groups of employees or individual employees, but to also be able to apply my curiosity and my intellectual interests to explore new frontiers when it comes to workplace technologies. And so while working for the union, I was able to research and write an article about emerging technologies in the workplace, which was the subtitle was "Who's Watching the Man Who's Watching Me," and that article really covered a lot of the then emerging technologies. And then since then, I've been focused on related topics involving technologies, workplace technologies, including just simple things like email, but internet, but now, and also social media. And those have now converged into being sources of geo-tracking information. And so part of my path that I've been lucky enough to move towards has been tied with having someone who recognized my curiosity and was supportive of that, and then having the curiosity to really examine these issues and be able to present papers at conferences, both in the US and in other parts of the world, on these issues. And as I said, I've been very fortunate to have encountered during that time other scholars who have similar interests. And there is, many people around the world who are working in this field, and through from the start of the early, the mid 2000s forward, 2005, 2006 forward, I've been able to have connections with a number of scholars who from various disciplines that have really enhanced my work and also allowed for me to grow in understanding of these profound issues.
One evening in 2006, in a taxi queue in front of a hotel in St. Louis, I personally witnessed you step between two taxi drivers who were squared off and ready to fight each other. You talked them down with remarkable confidence, poise, and authority. What in your background prepared you for that moment?
Well, I remember that moment very well, and it's not unique. I've engaged in similar peacemaking in other areas, most memorably also on a New York City subway in which two people were fighting, and I was able to break up the fight in the middle of the train moving. I think part of what motivates me, or what the basis for it is, twofold. One is I'm the son of a police officer who took his job very seriously. Not that I was acting in trying to enforce the law, but I also understand that there's a time and place for things, and there's a need for people to be engaged citizens. I think that one of the things that we have to remind ourselves in this time of climate change, insurrections, other activities that are frightening, is to realize that we have to take control over what we can do, and whatever we can do to then do that. And so that incident was my view of being able to, with my skills as a lawyer, to be able to moderate something that was transpiring, which was only going to lead to more, to violence and injuries. So by stepping forward in that situation and other situations, I was able to calm the situation down. And I think that we all, as citizens, as scholars, as people engaged in the world, we need to be mindful of our duty to do what we can when the moment arises, to work towards bringing peace and justice to this world, but not in a grand way, but in a simple way of how we act, because that's really the only thing we have control over, is our own actions. And so that was I think the genesis of that moment that you remember in St. Louis. But I can assure you, my wife can attest to other situations in which I've done similar kinds of activities. Again, I think it's just a matter of about us, each of us, acting in an ethical way, in a humane way, towards making the world a better place. And it's done moment by moment, as opposed to having grand gestures or grand announcements, but rather just simply how we behave.
Bill, thank you for this conversation and for all you have done in your career.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate it very much, and I'm really honored by this receiving the medal from the American Geographical Society.
Enjoy.
Thank you so much.